Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Sami. Thank you so much to those of you that are going to join me this morning while we are live. So a very happy Friday to you, and a happy Friday to anyone that actually tunes in today and has a listen and gets curious about learning about your inner critic. And then to any of you who may watch this at a later stage, thanks for coming and getting curious, and welcome. So to those of you that do join me this morning, I can't actually see you when you join unless you give some kind of reaction or comment. So yay, hello. Okay, brilliant. I can actually see you starting to join now, which is fantastic. Hopefully you can hear me all okay. If you can't, just pop it in the comments and I'll see what I can do on this end, but it sounds as though it's all perfect. All right, so before I launch into the content and just give a bit more of a chance for people to join, I want to give you a bit of information about who I am. So I have spent most of my career in the education sector, working with young people in universities and schools. So I feel like I'm very familiar with the common thoughts that they have about life. I also went back to study just a little while ago and studied counselling at university to kind of equip myself with the knowledge to then go and start a social enterprise this year, which has been a scary experience, but it's been awesome. And so that sees me going into classrooms and talking to young people, mostly high school students, about mindset and well-being. So that's a little bit about me and why I'm here, and why I'm talking about the inner critic, particularly in terms of being so much to do with our mind, and it can really control the way in which our life plays out. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you. If you do have some paper and a pen handy, bring that across, get that in front of you. Hey Rianta and hey Danica, I saw Alex there as well, and Rowanna. So hello, thank you. It's so nice to know that I have an audience. I've really missed having an audience, I've got to say. So normally I am in the classroom, but obviously schools have been online for such a long time. So I miss talking about what I'm passionate about. So thank you to Happiness Co for giving me this opportunity and for starting the Happiness Aid initiative. It's so incredible, and I think it's really needed right now in the times that we're living in, which are pretty challenging. So hey Ree. So thank you so much, and what an amazing bunch of speakers there have been. I've tuned into so many of the videos, and wow, so I feel really privileged and really lucky to be part of this. I've got to say, during this time, so talking about COVID-19 and the restrictions that have been in place and how it's impacted our lives, I feel like for most of us, the inner critic would be getting really loud. Because at any time of change, we've obviously got to adapt to that, and I think we can be really critical in the process. I've heard so many people say things like, hi Marie, thanks for joining. And yes, Rianda, we've definitely had some amazing speakers as part of this Happiness Aid initiative, and so happy to be here. But yeah, going back to what I feel like people are so critical of themselves right now, particularly during this time that is really challenging for all of us. And I've heard so many people say things like, I need to be focusing more, I'm not productive enough, I'm not doing a good enough job at balancing the different things that are going in my life, my work, my home life, the things that light me up. I think setting barriers has been really hard, especially for those of us, which is me as well, that's been working from home. So there's never been a more important time to try and calm down your inner critic than now, because I do think it is really loud. I'll share something about myself in terms of my reactions and what my inner critic has been doing. It basically just majorly catastrophized at the start of all of this, and started to see my life in really negative ways. I don't know if anyone else found this, and if you did, then maybe pop a comment in there so I don't feel totally alone. But what happened was a few kind of crappy things had happened before this sort of came about for me. So I had a breakup, and I moved out of that beautiful sort of home that we'd created together, and I moved quite far away from kind of the center of where I used to be, which was in the city. And I'd also really reduced my hours down in my my full-time job, so that was a pretty scary move. And then this hit, and I just felt like, whoa, like my life looks different to what I expected it to. And yeah, it just was not a good feeling. So thankfully I managed to kind of conquer it and get over it and tame it down and find the things that I'm grateful for amongst this time. So that's a little bit about me and what happened to my mindset, and my inner critic got pretty loud. I think Danika's saying there that hers has been loud too. The new norm. Okay, cool. I'm more normal than I expected. All right, let's jump into the content about what the inner critic is. All right, so it's been named many different things. You might know it by a different name. There's things like the fault finder, or negative self-talk, or the mean girl, or maybe it's the mean guy for you. So it's named many different things, but essentially it's the internal monologue that we've got going on in our minds. And often it's working on a subconscious level, so we're not actually aware of it. And yeah, absolutely, you mean girl. That's familiar with you, Rianda. So it's happening on a subconscious level, and the reason that that's happened is that something in our life, probably when we were a lot younger, we've internalized, and it's become so deeply internalized that we almost don't notice that it's there anymore. So the awareness kind of disappears, and so we risk that we kind of lead our life out of a place of your inner critic, which is really not what you want to be doing. Good morning to Happiness Aid and to Rebecca. Thank you for joining. And hey, Steffi, yay, thanks for joining. It's so nice to know that you guys are there on the other end, hopefully relating to some of what I'm saying. So it's happening on a subconscious level. The first thing that is so important, I'm going to talk to this more as I go, is awareness. Happy Friday, my love. So awareness is the first step, because this is so often for so many of us, maybe for some of us listening, definitely for some of the students that are in the classroom, they're sort of not aware that this inner critic is going on and that they can have some control over those thoughts. And this internal monologue is saying things like, I'm not good enough, I'm not skinny enough, I'm not fit enough or active enough, I'm not as successful as I thought I would be, whatever success might be in your mind. I haven't progressed enough. Why am I not in that leadership position? Maybe I'm not the daughter or the son that I'm hoping to be. Things like that. That is your inner critic. If any of those things connect with you, you are not alone. Definitely some of those things I can relate to. So for those of you that do have your pen and paper in front of you, just write down some of the things that your inner critic typically tells you, okay, that's getting pretty noisy. So write one thing down if you like. If you have a list of things which you know sort of play on repeat in your mind as a little tape, then write a few things down. And we're going to come back to those things and try and tame them down with some strategies a bit later on. All right, so once you've done that, I want to say that the reason that it's important to get control of your inner critic is that you hear your voice more than any other voice, right? And so I heard Julian in one of his videos that have gone on to the Happiness Aid platform say that, you go to bed with yourself and you wake up with yourself. There is no one else that we have to kind of spend more time with than ourselves, right? And so you want to make sure that those thoughts that are spinning for you all the time are more kind than they are cruel. All right, because the relationship that you have with yourself is the most long-term, most precious, most significant relationship that you are ever going to have. And I feel like that's a really important learning for me, because I think so many of us can focus on the relationships that we've got going on around us, right? So the relationships that we have with our partners, the relationships we have with our friends, our family, so much of our focus can be taken there, but we've really got to start with ourselves, because there's no avoiding us, you know. We can't kind of take a break from ourselves. We've got to sort of tune in there and be okay with the thoughts that we've got, so let's make them kind. That's why I think it is really important, especially at this time when I feel like our inner critics are getting a bit louder than normal. All right, so why do we have an inner critic? You know, if it's so detrimental to us, then why is it there in the first place? The reason is it's coming from a place of fear to try and keep us safe. All right, so it's spinning the worst case scenario for us to try and keep us from harm. So basically, it's our mind's protection mechanism. It's just a faulty one, right? So sometimes when something happens in our life, it feels like our mind thinks maybe we need an intervention. So it calls upon old, deeply internalized thoughts to try and kind of like deal with those. And what it's trying to do, it's trying to stop you from feeling humiliation, and it's trying to kind of just keep you feeling like you belong. You know, it doesn't want you to be an outlier. It doesn't want you to be different in any way. It just tries to keep you in that little box. Yes, absolutely, Rianda. It's coming from a place of fear and not love, and I know that's been spoken about so often by the speakers. All right, so let me give you an example of this happening for me. So I went back to uni not long ago and chose to study counselling, which for me was really different. My background has been in commerce. And so, yeah, I went into this classroom and I was surrounded by mostly younger people than me. I'm 30 now, and I'd say most of them had gone straight from school, most of them into a psychology degree, and then progressed to counselling as like a postgraduate degree. And so there I found myself with people who knew the theories, they knew the therapies already that we were learning about. So many of them had been out in the field, and they kind of had, in my eyes, their whole, which they did, their whole career and futures ahead of them. And somehow that was making me think that I didn't, and that I shouldn't be there, because I'd already kind of had a career, but it was in something totally different. And so, yeah, I just felt like I didn't belong for quite a long time. And it was a real fight to kind of stay there and sort of kind of be confident with my decision to be there in the first place. And to kind of back myself. But so often I was telling myself, you know what, Sami, maybe you should stay on the career path that you were on, because you've put a lot of time into that, and maybe just don't do this. But thankfully I pushed through. If I didn't, like, imagine that, it'd be a really different reality for me right now. So I probably wouldn't have started the business that I've got in mindset and well-being. I don't think I would have had the confidence or enough knowledge behind me to do it. And so, yeah, maybe I wouldn't even be here today. So important to kind of conquer your inner critic in those times when it gets loud. All right, so where does it come from then? Like, are we born with this? The reality is no. So what's happening is our inner critic tries to mimic criticisms that we've had put towards us at some point in time. Okay? Yay, Steffi, yeah, I'm glad I'm here too. Thank you for listening and tuning in. So that's what happens. It's mimicking criticisms you've heard once upon a time, probably a long time, when you were younger. Okay, so it's learned behavior. It's not something that we're born with at all. And it comes from comments perhaps that we might get from the people around us, so our peers, maybe from friends, from family. Relationships might have an impact on us in this way and kind of tap into an inner critic. Trauma can do this. The media can do this, absolutely, in terms of telling us ways in which we should look, we should be, we should feel. The inner critic's all about the shoulds, right? Like if you hear yourself ever say, I feel like I should be at this stage, or something like that, that's when you kind of know that you're in a bit of a danger zone and the inner critic is sort of taking power. And also just social norms. Like I definitely feel that sometimes you can feel like society kind of expects you to be living in a certain way and ticking off things in a list as you go. And so that can definitely play into your inner critic as well. Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, I pushed through. Here I am. And thanks, Cheryl, for joining the conversation as well. Okay, so why do we give the inner critic airtime then? Mostly it's because we're not actually aware that it is there, right? So if you learn nothing else today but to know that these thoughts in your head you have a little bit of control over, and there's some strategies that you can use to kind of control them, that's amazing. Like awareness is the first step before you can try and start changing this. So that is brilliant, but that's the reason we give it airtime, is because often we're not aware of it. And even if you are aware of it, I feel like I became aware of it in my mid-20s, so not that long ago really. And one of my friends, Steph, that's listening actually, is kind of the one that first brought my attention to it. But yeah, for all that time, I was probably living my life very much being led by this inner critic and kind of not being able to take control of that. Another reason that we let it have airtime is that we are not really taught about this, right? Like our parents definitely were not taught about it. Our grandparents definitely not either. And so I don't know like where we learn this information from. I learned it obviously from one of my best friends. If you've learned it, maybe share in the comments where you learned that you had an inner critic, or at what moment. What was that kind of moment that triggered it for you, that, oh, hang on, like these thoughts are not all fact. Like these are cruel words and they don't have to be true to me. Like I have the right to challenge them. So I'd be curious to know. And maybe there's some people that are kind of becoming aware of it now as you're listening, and that is so amazing. And if you get that only from this, then that's fantastic. The thing about the inner critic is that it can make us play small. Okay, so our thoughts, they often become our words, right? And then they become our actions, and then they become our experiences. And so, in your mind, that transforms out. Like you've got to be aware. It's not just your inner critic kind of giving you a hard time in your mind. That plays out in our life. And I do feel like it keeps us playing small. Hello, Ryan, and hello, Vita. Yes, some amazing books being suggested here as well on the Mean Girl. Amazing. So these thoughts that we have, they become words, actions, experiences. And so, sometimes you can live a life that's less wonderful than you're actually capable of living, right? So we don't want that to happen. So let's talk about how to tame our inner critic. I think that is the most important thing that I can give to you today. The good news is you can reprogram the old and outworn thoughts that you have. So hopefully that's good news, right? Like as soon as you are aware of something and you know that it's in your control, that's a good place to be, because you can actually make an impact. So let's talk about that. So thoughts are basically habits, okay? And what that means is that habits are open to transformation. So your thoughts can change with a little work. Alrighty, so let's try a strategy. Let's externalize our inner critic, okay? So what that means is that we're going to make it separate to our own persona, our own lovely selves. We're going to start separating this inner critic away so we can almost look at it and witness it as something separate to our own identity. One way to do that is to give it a name. Okay, so a name that's separate to yourself. And that's going to start creating the divide so that within your mind you can work out that, okay, this is not necessarily me, it's not necessarily the truth, it's just old thoughts. Okay, so I'll share my inner critic name. Her name is Regina, after the mean girl of all mean girls, right? From the movie. But you could use, any kind of villain from like a TV series or a movie, a story, maybe a politician that you particularly don't like. Maybe you've just got a name that you just, you don't love, and it kind of conjures up negative thoughts. Write that down for me, or at least have that in your mind. For anyone that wants to share the name of their inner critic in the comments, please do. Students, when I talk about the inner critic and we talk about externalizing, come up with the best name. So get creative with it, write it down. And then the next step of externalizing, I want you to just write 3 things that you love about yourself. Okay, so they could be about your character. So it might be that you're patient, you're reliable, you're kind, you're brave, you're courageous, you're enthusiastic. Write down 3 traits that you feel you love about yourself. They could even be things like, I don't know, maybe you have lovely eyes, or you love that you're tall. So write down 3 things, okay? So you should have your inner critic's name at the top, and then 3 things that you love about yourself. And what we're going to do is we're kind of going to have like a little mantra that we're going to tell ourselves when we notice that the inner critic is getting loud. So I'll give you an example of how I do this, and then do it to yourself, okay? So either write it down or say it out loud to yourself. Okay, so mine is, hold up, Regina. So I am kind, and I am thoughtful, and I am an encourager. So I'm not going to listen to you. Okay? So it starts off with hold up, like a kind of stopping your inner critic in their tracks, then insert your inner critic's name. I am, and then list off those 3 things that you are good at, and then have some kind of statement like, so I'm not playing into your games, or so I'm not going to listen to you today. I know that probably sounds like a really strange concept, but I just feel like it's something that you remember, like you remember putting a name to your inner critic. And I think enforcing then the things that you love about yourself when you're in that kind of mindset is really important as well. So hopefully when you leave and you stop watching this video and you go about living your life, you kind of remember this, and that helps kind of externalizing your inner critic. So hopefully that helped a little bit. Another strategy that I have for you is challenging your thoughts with what's called cognitive restructuring. And basically you just ask yourself 3 questions, and I'll give you an example afterwards. So first of all, you ask, what is true about what you feel about yourself? So let's look back at the comments that we made at the start of this video in terms of the inner critic stories that we tell ourselves. I'm not good enough, I'm not active enough, I'm not successful enough, those kind of things. So what we first ask ourselves is, what is the evidence that this statement is true? The second question is, what is the evidence that this statement is false? And then the third one, what is the no more what is. How can I frame this differently to be a healthier, happier thought for me to have? This is a really good one to know, and I just remember it as true, false, framed differently. Okay, so I'm going to use an example for me. I just mentioned that I just came out of a relationship. Sometimes I feel as though people think that I am the girl that just goes from one relationship to the next. And perhaps maybe they think that I've got poor judgment. Sometimes I think that people have that thought. Let me challenge it though, right? So what's true about that? Okay, what's true is that I haven't met the person that I want to spend the rest of my life with, or I haven't been with the person that I want to spend the rest of my life with. Damn it. So yeah, that's the reality, right? That's true about that statement. And I've not been someone that's been single for a long time. I have had some long-term relationships, so that's true. What's false though about it, right? I'm an extremely measured person. Like, far more than I would like to be, actually. It's really annoying. So I consider things a long time, like for a long time before I make decisions. So actually, can I really like fairly question my judgment? I don't think so. Like if I was a person that kind of acted off, you know, just not thinking about things and kind of did things in the spur of the moment, then maybe I could question my judgment, but I don't really think that's me. And so then how can I frame this in a more healthier way for me? What I would tell myself is I've just not been with the right person yet. And I'm proud of myself for not settling for someone that I know wasn't right for me. And I'm grateful for what I've learned from the relationships. So way healthier, right? Than that initial thought that I had. And so this is a brilliant way to challenge the thoughts that come up for you, the inner critic for you. So challenging your thoughts with the questions, what is true about what I'm telling myself? What is false about what I'm telling myself? And how can I frame this differently? Because we've got to be more kind than cruel to ourselves. Hopefully that helped. Basically, let's now talk about the fact that the flip side of the inner critic. So we have an inner critic and then we have an inner nurturer as well, or an inner cheer squad. And that's also come from when we were younger, and we've also internalized the positive things that have come our way. Okay, so just as we've internalized some of the negative, we've internalized some of the positive too, from the nurturers that were in our lives at that point in time. Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Rianda. Thanks for keeping up the conversation and definitely engaging with what I'm saying. I'm loving it. And so these positive nurturers in our lives are often teachers, our parents or our grandparents, our aunties, our uncles, our cousins, our siblings, maybe some older children that we know at school, and they say good things about us, and we internalize those too. So you've got to tap into that. That is there, like, you know, deep down, right, that you are worthy and that you are many wonderful things. Thanks, Ree. And so, yeah, you've got to remember that. Someone who I think is doing an amazing job at taming the inner critic and kind of tapping more into their inner cheer squad is Celeste Barber. I don't know if any of you sort of follow her. She's so incredible. I just love her. She's the biggest laugh. So she's an Aussie comedian, and she recreates like celebrity photos and videos in just a much more real way. And so she kind of like puts those together and kind of compares them and is like, this is the model and this is me. And I love her because I feel like what she's doing for us is she is giving a representation of herself that is really true, right? And we're not perfect, like no human is. And so she recreates these poses. Thanks, Rhino. That, yeah, I just feel like we can relate to, like, we would be like, that is how we would look if we did that dance or we did that pose. I would not look like the model that's dancing in the bikini on the boat. I would look like Celeste, right, who's just having a good time. So I feel like when you really kind of step into self-love, people sense it and they want to follow suit. And so how amazing is that? Like, if you can grow your self-love, it's going to kind of be felt by others, and then it has this ripple effect. And I think Celeste is just one of those people that really comes to mind for me as just such an awesome legend, right, Danica? She just always gives me a laugh, and like, we've got to laugh in this world. And so I think she's spectacular. All right, let me just get my little notes. Let's talk about self-love. Firstly, I want to clarify that it is not selfish. First of all, it's the very opposite. You are naturally deserving of your own kindness, okay? And I imagine that quite a number of you are watching, so kind of generously give your kindness to other people, but you've got to give it to yourself, okay? And the reason that I think that self-love is not selfish, and sometimes I know people can think that, like, oh, I shouldn't be kind of treating myself to this or giving my time to do that because there are other people that need me. But the thing is that you have to remember is that it's up to no one else to complete us, just as it's not up to us to complete anyone else, right? And so the more self-love that we have, we're less likely to need to pull upon others. And so I think that it's really important. It's not selfish. It's actually just kind of taking on the role of keeping your own cup full. And so let's talk about self-love, and let's talk about how we can build it, because I feel like it's the ultimate weapon against the inner critic. I mean, we've talked about externalizing and challenging our thoughts, and sometimes our inner critic is so loud that those things don't quite like cut through, right? So when that happens, let's bring in the big guns. Let's bring in some self-love. And I'm going to go through a big list that I think a lot of you will hopefully find useful. That's pretty universal to all of us. But you're going to have your own list too, and we're going to talk about that at the end. All right, so first of all, limit your unhelpful thinking patterns. So we've gone through that today. That's just something to be mindful of. Second of all, relationships are really important. And first up, the relationship with yourself is the most important, okay? So giving yourself the time every day or every week to have some kind of reflection time. Hello, Shanae. Thank you for joining. And so, yeah, give yourself the time to reflect. Whether that's having a walk and reflecting in that way, whether you journal, whether you do that during exercise or whatever it might be, give yourself the time to reflect, because I feel like we kind of cut ourselves short from that sometimes. We are so often on our phones and so often on devices, and that's kind of filling up the gaps in our life that we used to have to kind of just sit with our own thoughts. And the more you sit with your own thoughts and kind of think about what's been happening in your life and how you're feeling about it, your kind of self-awareness is going to increase, and that's only going to be a good thing. So remember to give yourself that time to reflect, and that the relationship you have with yourself is the most important. But let's not forget the other relationships in our lives, our friends, our family, our colleagues, the people that are important to us around us. They are, a natural protective system in a lot of ways. And that's why for so many of us, on our self-love little list that we might have, or the things that bring us joy, is so often connection, right? And kind of reaching out to the people that we love, having a chat on the phone or a Teams or a Zoom call. And when we can, having coffee, having a wine, those relationships are so important to us. So healthy relationships are definitely on the list. Your emotions are important to be aware of, and I'm talking about both the positive and the negative. So getting in touch with those, and just remembering that I know so many times we want to celebrate the good that's in our life, and we want to kind of project the positive, right? And we want to suppress like the negative feelings, the sadness, maybe the anger we have, the embarrassment, whatever negative feelings we have at different points in time. But just remember that when you suppress, I know sometimes you can be like, hey, you know, I'm kind of shrinking this emotion and kind of pulling it down and suppressing, but that emotion is going to color your life regardless, right? So you've got to attend to the negative as well as the positive. Otherwise, the negative's just going to rule things anyway, and just come out in weird, different ways throughout our life. So attend to both positive and the negative emotions that you have. When you're in a bad headspace, or when your inner critic is taking charge, avoid being avoidant. All right. So often we want to bury our head in the sand and just pretend that things aren't really happening around us. It's all sweet. We're just continuing on with our lives. That's not a good way to be. It actually might be helpful kind of short term, but long term, again, it kind of just goes back to regulating your emotions and not kind of ignoring them and pretending that they're not there. So avoid being avoidant, okay? Even though that sometimes that is really tempting. All right, the other point, get active. I mean, there's been so many speakers on this platform that are incredible and talk to this topic, and there are so many advantages and amazing things that we can get from being active. And if nothing else, just see it as the chance to relax, to kind of unclutter your mind, and exercise promotes better sleep as well. So we know a lot of the obvious things about exercise, but those things I just mentioned come into play too. And for me, they're kind of the most convincing reasons why I want to be exercising. So keep those in mind. My other point is gratitude, and I feel like the Happiness Aid platform really celebrates this. Thanks, Josh. I'm glad that you think this is awesome, amazing. Being grateful for what we have, you're all really celebrating that in this platform, and I love those of you that make live videos and you talk about what you're grateful for, or you list the things that you're grateful for. And the beautiful thing about gratitude is that the more that we practice it daily, the more we just naturally realize the things that we're grateful for day to day. Okay, so research shows that if we practice gratitude for 21 days, so for 3 weeks, what happens is we just start to naturally realize the beautiful things that are around us, whether that's the sunshine, hearing the birds, being able to breathe in the fresh air, a beautiful meal that someone's cooked for you, things like that. So I think gratitude is really an important thing. Kindness is something that I feel has got me through this time, through my inner critic kind of struggle and the catastrophizing that I've been doing a little bit. Kindness boosts your serotonin and your endorphins. So selfishly, it kind of brings a happiness to you, but what it also does is it lets people that you know, or even that you don't know, if you're doing random acts of kindness, kind of feel the love and feel that they're cared for. And I think particularly during hard times like this, that is really important to remind people of that. So I've been writing lots of cards. I've always been a bit old school like that. So sending cards in the post, which is just amazing not to have a bill, right? Like to receive a letter or a card, sending flowers, giving someone a call, just little acts of kindness, letting people know that you care for them. I think that can help us combat the inner critic and kind of get us out of that negative mind frame and sort of out of that and thinking about other people. And then my last one on the list is belief boosters. So there's this annoying thing called negativity bias, right? So we've spoken a lot about that during this presentation. So we're more likely to tune into criticism and insults than we are to the praise that we get, okay? But when a compliment comes our way, or someone does something beautiful for us or says something gorgeous about us, how good is that feeling? Like, I've always tried to tell myself, actually, I need to, when I see something that I think is beautiful in someone, I try and speak it as much as possible, because I know how much that means, especially when you're having a bad day, to kind of feel that little token that someone's kind of, noticing something great about you. And so why not take that from that moment that is amazing and that kind of lifts your spirits, and write that down, or record a voice memo in your phone about it, or have somewhere to kind of take these, note these things down. I used to handwrite it and kind of pop it in a box. And then you can refer to it whenever your inner critic is getting really loud, okay? So just having, a read through the wonderful things that people have said about you or done for you, and just the joys that people in your life have brought to you, whether they know you, whether they're a stranger. I think they're all beautiful, and they make us so much happier. So I think that's a really good thing to do. But over to you. I want you to write down some things that you know bring you joy. And this list is going to be different for all of us. For me, I know that a guaranteed way to make myself happy is to get to the beach. I grew up in the hills, so I am so far away from the beach. But what I've realized in getting older is that the beach is it just makes me feel so grounded and so appreciative of the fact that we live in Australia, and particularly in Perth, right? Like, we have beautiful beaches. And so seeing a sunset, feeling the sand under my feet, having a swim in the ocean, for me, is a guaranteed way to feel good. So maybe that is on your list as well. But there are so many things, right? Like, it could be having a massage, like doing a bit of pampering. It could be having wine with your friend. It could be getting out for a walk in the fresh air, in nature. It could be reading a book. It could be dancing to music. It could be going to a live gig when we get to do that again. Can't wait for that. So write those things down. Just have all these weapons, right? So that when you feel like your inner critic is just untamable, bring in the big guns. All right. So so celebrating the small miracles, Vita's saying, absolutely. Just being grateful for the things that every day are around us that sometimes we can take for granted. And amen to the beach, Ryan. I think that's a place for a lot of us where we do feel joy, and so grateful to be living here in sunny WA. So write those things down, okay? And stick them somewhere that you are going to notice them, or pop them in your phone. And refer to them when you're feeling crappy. Do one of those things, because it's going to bring you joy. It's a guaranteed way. You know it. You've got the list. It's your list of joys. So, get that happening. Coastal walks, coffee, sunsets, time with your nephews, absolutely. They're all guaranteed ways to make you feel pretty happy and pretty grateful for the things that you've got in life. Coffee, right? I feel like that's one for so many of us. That's like my main joy in the mornings. All right. So I hope that you've really enjoyed listening along, and that you've learned a thing or two. If it's just initially that you're aware of your inner critic, amazing. That's perfect. I'm so glad that you've become aware of it. But also just remembering to externalize. So remember the name that you gave your inner critic, and then combat it with the 3 things that you love about yourself, and say, so I'm going to, not listen to you anymore. So use that to kind of stop them in their tracks. Challenge your thoughts, okay? So what is the evidence that this thought is true, that it's false, and how can I reframe it so that it's a happier, healthier thought? So often we do not give weight to the evidence, I've got to say. We give weight to perhaps what someone says about us, things like that. So remember those things, and remember to tap into your inner nurturer, your inner cheer squad, and build your self-love, because it's not only good for you, and of course that's the most important thing, but it's good for others, right? It's so good for others. It gives them permission and allows them to follow suit and love themselves as well, and be kind to themselves. So Thanks everyone. Thank you so much for your beautiful comments. I've loved talking to you. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a wonderful weekend. See you.